Okay, thanks everyone. So I just started the recording. Thanks for joining us. We wanted to take you all through the US squash tournament structure. I know some of you on this call are playing in the silver event this upcoming weekend. For some, it's your first event and you've kind of just trusted us and kind of blindly gone in and gotten into the US squash system. But it's brought up a handful of questions from you to us. Not all of the answers we knew because these policies change year on year. So this is also a good exercise for myself and the team to get up to date with the latest US squash policies. But this is really just an overarching review of the current state of play and the high level pieces of information that we feel like you need now. For the majority of you, you're just starting off on this journey of US squash events. But it's important because how we start will certainly affect sort of what happens 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And hopefully I can explain why throughout this presentation. So in terms of what we'll discuss, 5 key components. I'll stop after each section. I think it will be easier and better for those that listen on the recording to have the sort of questions come up after each section. So we'll discuss becoming a US squash member, how to do that and what that means. The US squash tournament structure, which is probably the most complex piece of this, navigating the ranking system. Some of the information there will be sort of personal advice more than what US squash would communicate, but that's our job to try and decipher the ranking system. High school and college squash, predominantly the college squash component, high school does play a role. And then the roles of yourselves as parents and ourselves as coaches and just PCC and the program at large. At this point, those on the call will probably have at some point become a US squash member. And ultimately that's the start of the journey for you or your children. And something that we discussed on a recent Teaching Pros call nationally is, you know, this initial cost to joining, and then you join, and then you take a ref test, and then you enter your first tournament. And, you know, just try and encourage you that that isn't sort of how it feels every time you enter one of these events, but it does feel somewhat steep initially. But it's just one of those barriers that you have to access. Tennis is similar, golf is the same. So becoming a US squash member is key. That kind of opens up this world of junior tournaments. In terms of what US squash has to offer and how we interact, the background of this slide is a screenshot of the US squash junior website. So I encourage you to go onto the US squash website. I have a slide at the end that has some useful links. I will share the slide, and of course I'll share the recording for anyone that wants to sort of reference back to this at a later date. They range from starting as a junior in your top left-hand corner, all the way through to preparing for college, making the junior national team, sportsmanship awards, so on and so forth. So truthfully, everything that I'm telling you here is in the US squash website, in and amongst all of these links. I'm just trying to help decipher the most important information and give it to you at a high level. So you've created a US squash account, you've signed up for membership. Many of you at this point will have taken the referee exam. That sits in your or your child's profile, fairly easy to navigate. If you have any challenges with that, let me know. It's under the certifications tab. There's 5 levels. Level 1 references under 13s and below and works through to a level 5. Each time you age up, so you go into under 15s, you take the level 2. Every 2 years, it gets predominantly more challenging in an aim to sort of increase their knowledge and their comfort level when they're refereeing these matches. Step 3 would be to find your age group. It's classified as under 11, not 11 and under, which is often confused. So as soon as you turn 11, you're now in the under 13s. It's not what class you're in at school. It's not what day, you know, how old are you in September of a certain year. So if your birthday is on the Sunday of an event, you're playing in the older age group in that situation. So when you're looking through, just make sure you're looking into the right age groups. On the US Squash website, you can find tournaments. You'll navigate through all the various levels. And then when you enter the tournaments, just make sure you review the tournament policies. There's a lot of information. Having worked for US Squash previously, the reason there's so much is because people try and find loopholes. It can often mean that we disregard a lot of the information. Do read it. It probably seems insignificant now, especially with children of a younger age. But as injuries become more prevalent, or so people try and play the system, so to speak, that's why they've developed all of these policies. So develop in good spirit, but because there's people trying to find loopholes. Before I continue, any questions on any of that?
Yeah, Rich, it's Sarah. I had someone ask me, what's the average cost of a tournament?
You're looking at about $75 for a bronze, 90 to 110 for a silver, 110, 120 for a gold. US Squash sort of own the JCTs, which is the highest level. They can range from sort of 130 to 150.
Cool. Thanks.
US Squash basically set those prices. So you don't have a ton of wiggle room. And as I'll get to shortly, which is why we kind of run the match play clinics the way we do, and the interclub in the past, because it's not cheap.
Right. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, I'll move on. This is sort of the fun but complicated piece. So the US Squash tournament structure, you know, I've just used all those labels and that language with Sarah. So when we talk about that, kind of listed in a pillar form here, US Squash try and think of it as a pyramid, that the bronze is the broadest base of the pyramid, but it's really an upside down pyramid after COVID, because there just hasn't been the same amount of sort of playing as there was previously at the lower level events. That's had a knock-on effect, which I'll get into a little bit later. So basically, at the tip of the pyramid is the JCTs. It's the US Squash Junior Championship Tour. It's the highest level of event, kind of what many people are aspiring to get into. Then you go to a gold event, the next level down, a silver that we're hosting this weekend, and then a bronze event, which is typically advertised as kind of entry level, but that can be misleading. And again, we're going to get further into that. What we do on a Sunday and a Friday night with the match play here sort of sits below all of these, and in our mind prepares people for entry into these tournaments. So when we were on the call the other day and they were talking about, well, the first competition is really expensive, my response was, if that's the first time you feel like you've really gotten stuck into some match play opportunities, you're not doing it right in your own club. They need to feel like, or you need to make it low barrier to entry. Hopefully you all feel like we're offering sort of that here within the club, so that when we feel like you're ready for a bronze or a silver, while you have had to pay for a few things all in one go, it's not like it's your first segue into some competitive play. What do these labels mean in reality? So a JCT tends to attract players ranked 1 to 32 in the country. And then all of the other tournaments lay over 50% approximately of the next draw. So a gold attracts players from 16 to 70. So the top of gold offers the same, if not very similar, points to the bottom half of a JCT. The silver is 50 to 150, so about half of the bottom of the gold is representative of the top of the silver. The same applies to a bronze, 100 to 250 in the rankings. In some age categories, there's more than 250 people in the ranking list. In the younger ones, say under 11, there may not be more than 150. Again, this has a knock-on effect as to our advice to you, because you know, as an under 11, when there's only 100 people in the ranking list, why would you enter a bronze event when, if you win it, you're basically at the bottom of the ranking list? You're not making any progress. So that's why we're having this call today, basically, is to help you navigate which tournament is for us and what does the timing of that look like. Some things to consider, unfortunately or fortunately, which depending on how you look at it, we live in one of the strongest squash areas in the country. What applies here and what I say today doesn't necessarily apply to all the other regions that are playing. There are emerging regions, the West Coast, and particularly the Bay Area. Texas, Houston, Dallas, Austin is showing huge growth. Atlanta, the same. So some of the typical cities that we think squash is in, this applies to, but in some of those others, that's not the case. And some of the advice that we've given to our junior families is, because of point number 1 here, some of these events are really challenging to get into. Traveling to New Jersey, Maryland, DC, and Virginia have been worthwhile, at least at the beginning. You know, Lee, you referenced at the beginning of the call, Lily's playing the number 2 seed. Again, that's 2 silver tournaments in a row. And basically it's because the first couple of events, you don't have a ranking and therefore you don't have a seeding. And so you get pretty tough draws. If you can start off outside of this area, or at least sort of consider 1 or 2 events, it's going to help propel you so that when you enter the tournaments, you won't be one of the lower seeds. And I think at that point, I'm going to pause because I'm hoping there's some questions, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on a couple of these points. No questions? Okay. This next slide, the data is old. This was from when I previously worked at US Squash, but it's not, the sort of concept remains the same. So in the center is the gold tournament points. If you win a gold, you get 2,000 points. And actually that's representative of more than halfway up. So 11 is the highest in the JCT that we see on this page. So it even gets you to about 10. In the junior silver, 750 points for winning gets you into 12th in the junior gold. In a bronze, to win is 350. That's representative of 16th, 15th place in a silver. These numbers aren't accurate anymore. They've changed slightly, but this is an insight as to what US Squash do year on year to see how accurate are the points-based ranking system. And they make tweaks every year or 2 based on the data that they see. So as we advise you in terms of what tournaments to enter, and when we're talking about ranking points, especially at this moment in time, not many people will see bronze events on the calendar anyway. But sort of, I don't want you to be concerned about that, because we've got to remember that the top half of a bronze is representative of the bottom half of a silver. And so entering a silver, understanding that the first round match will be difficult and maybe a challenge to win. Once you lose that match and you're playing in the consolation draws, for all intents and purposes, you are among the same people that would be in the top half of a bronze. So there is a layover. So we've been trying to encourage people to play up, I suppose is the term, only because the bronze draws aren't filling. And this way, they may get more points than they may have otherwise if they try to play a bronze. But also from a level standpoint, you know, we don't want it to be a terrible experience. Just to feel comfortable with the fact that you're among peers that are doing the same thing as you, basically. One other thing to know is gold tournaments have remained at 32. Silvers have gone down to a 16-person draw. So this table here, as I've said, is not entirely accurate by number, but the concept remains the same. Any questions on either of these two slides here?
Hey, Rich. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go, Lee, you go.
Zoom.
Do we get points for only winning a match, or throughout the consolation round, if you win one, lose two? I mean, do you get any points for losing, but for scoring, or no?
So your rating is affected by every game won or lost.
Okay.
Your ranking and the ranking of points associated with that are basically determined by your wins. But can you all see my cursor?
Yep.
So if you lose your first round match and say you're playing for a 17-32 and you win, you then go into a draw that's 17-24. And you lose, you then go into a draw that's 21-24. You win, you play a 21-22 playoff, and you get 525 or 500 points.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the same applies to every draw, which is why we're trying to sort of encourage you to understand this, because previously what's happened is everyone has gone to a bronze event, even when a silver event hasn't filled up, because, well, it's your first tournament, so you need to start at a bronze. That's not entirely accurate. And so you end up sort of harming your ranking potential in the future. Again, I'm going to get into this on the next page, by not selecting the right events now. Sarah, please tell me you didn't have the same question as Lee.
I did not. My question was, are there still invitational tournaments or JCT invitational?
No, everything is by ranking.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, I'll move on. This is kind of the details that go into the previous two pages. So a player receives ranking points based on the place that you finish in a US squash sanctioned event. So if we run a Future Stars event here, but it's not sanctioned through US squash, they'll have a rating exchange and we can plug the scores into the system, but it doesn't give you any ranking points. A ranking is determined by totaling your best 4 scores and dividing that by 4. If a player has less than 4 exposures, they call tournaments exposures, then the average is still divided by 4. So if you to get a true reflection of your ranking, you're going to want to have at least 4 tournaments. Lee, in your situation, until that happens, Lily won't be sort of fairly represented in the rankings. This has changed because of COVID. This number has gone up, but a player can play up to 12 tournaments while maintaining a divisor of 4. It used to be 7. They're encouraging more play and just seeing that less and less people are playing. So they want to encourage play. The divisor then increases as the number of exposures increase. So if you play 13, 14, 15, the divisor is 5, 16, 17, 18, the divisor goes to 6, so on and so forth. And then the key to selecting the right tournaments now is an exposure remains on a player's tournament calendar for 11 months, at which point they expire. So for everyone that plays this upcoming weekend, 11 months from this weekend, the points from our PCC Junior Silver will expire and then drop off. That was more influential when you only had 7 exposures permitted and you took your best 4. Bumping up to 12 kind of relaxes that whole 11-month piece. But just important to keep in mind that they're going to take into account any tournament that you've played in the last 11 months. Any questions on that? Right. So what happens when someone ages up? US Squash can, again, continue to adjust a conversion percentage. With all the data that they have, they're probably using ratings as much as anything to make sure they get this right, but they have a sliding scale. The older you go through the age groups, the more points that you take with you. So if you go from under 11s to under 13s, you take 45%, under 13s to under 15s, 50%, and so on. Why is this important? And I'm going to switch my screen share. And I'm going to take you through a little case study that we took our staff through. So here's the US Squash website. They're down at the Spectre Center here in Center City. If I go into the ranking list, this is the girls under 11. You can search for as many people as you want. I'm going to go to one of our members. I have asked them that this is okay that I do this. And I'm going to use Maury Light in the girls under 11 age group. So Maury has an average of 841. She has 4 exposures. 841 times, so 45% of that will be 378.45. So if we go into girls under 13, I'm going to go to where has a ranking average of 378.45. So she ends up at 106 in the country. Now, Maury doesn't actually age up until October of 2022. So correctly, well, of course she wants to perform well, but correctly entering into the right tournaments, we hazarded a guess, the trajectory that she's on. We think that, let's say she's going to get to 10th. So we're at 17, the equivalent to sort of 1768, and 45% of that would be 795. So as she ages up, if she gets to where we all hope and dream, and maybe she'll get higher than that, but 795 puts her at 52 in the country. Okay. As we go back to Maury, you can do this with anyone, but I'm going to jump into her profile. You can see their match results and their tournament results. This is what you'll see in your profiles. So in in sort of bright green here are the tournaments that are point scoring tournaments. The fourth exposure is what looks like a ghost ranking from the what they did something over the summer to ensure people had time to regain their ranking. So you'll see on the end here that the points will drop off. So this point here, these points will drop off on May 17th of next year. So if as long as she's getting more than 315, she's going to increase her average. Let's say she puts on an 800, she'll have two 800s, a 900 and a 1,175. If she gets more than an 800, that will count and it will knock an 800 off. If she doesn't get more than 800, her average will remain the same. Does that concept make sense? If you have any questions, let me know.
Hey, Rich, it's Lee again.
That's great.
Are there tournaments all through the summer? I mean, basically, if something's falling off every month, I mean, realistically, you'd like to get a tournament every 1 to 2 months so that you're consistently scoring. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So yes, there are tournaments through the summer. As much as we try and say we're seasonal, as with all of the as with many sports now, if you want to play all year round, you can. There are some benefits to playing in what we would call the off season. Playing in the spring can be helpful. The traditional sort of powerhouse time would be September through March. But if you're doing other sports during that time, some of the draws aren't quite as strong in the non-traditional playing times. Some people play a ton of tournaments, but what I do want to reinforce is you don't need to play 15 tournaments. If you're thinking of trying to get 8 tournaments, you can do 1 a month fairly reasonably, and just pick what's right for your schedule and your children's other sports that they play. So I wouldn't jump in with both feet on trying to get in as many exposures as possible. Some people do. In the long term, I don't think that's good and healthy for them. You know, I would say at 13-ish, you're going to start making a bit more of a commitment one way or another. But we have some of our sophomores and juniors in high school still playing multiple sports. So it is possible. It looks a little different. We have to be creative, but you have 12 months of the year to pick, you know, to pick which tournaments you want to play. Going to switch back in. Hopefully that was helpful with Maury. Knowing the conversion percentages, trying to understand when your children's birthdays are, all of this is important. Maury's on a great trajectory. She's just turned 10. So what's going to happen is, even if she aged up today, she'd only go to about 100 in the under 13 age group. What we don't want to have is sort of someone having to start all over again from the bottom of the next age group. So in an ideal world, we start this process at 9, 10 years old, and then the system is set up to aid our development from a ranking perspective as we run through it, versus coming in at under 13, which I realize some people have to do. And you just get tough draws for longer until you establish yourself with a higher ranking. What does this mean bigger picture? What does this mean for college squash and for high school squash, which probably feels a long way away, but what you do now and making the correct steps early makes your sophomore and junior year much more simpler. I just wanted to have a quick overview so you're aware of what the scene is like. So in women's squash in college, there's 32 varsity teams. Typically, every school has 3 spots allocated per recruiting class, and there's 17 women's college club teams. They tend to not have any recruiting spots. They'll often support an application, but they won't sort of reserve spots for athletic recruits, or at least in squash. On the men's side, there's 34 college varsity teams. Again, 3 recruiting spots is typical. And then in club, there's 48 teams. Just to give you a quick insight into what do those teams and schools look like, on your screen now is the College Squash Association women's rankings. And I'm just going to let you read through the list of schools. These are all varsity programs. When they do not have a number ranking next to them, that's the start of the club programs. And then on the men's side, or co-ed in some situations, again, all of those with a ranking are varsity. And then without a ranking and number, those are your club teams. All right, not to spook you because college probably seems a million miles away, but I like to begin with the end in mind. Some people play because they love the idea of playing a sport in college, and squash might be their sport. But you know, the tournament system is driven by high school and college squash, and sort of we support that. We also support someone that wants nothing to do with playing squash in college, and this is a sport for life, and they're going to join a club like ours in their own adulthood, and they're just going to love playing the sport. High school plays a role because it's sort of their first proper entry into scholastic squash. Most schools want to see their recruits playing high school squash. There are instances where perhaps they don't, and they think it's in their best interest to not do it. But the majority of the time I have found when someone isn't playing high school squash, it throws up more red flags than anything else. For me, it's the most fun when you play squash on a team. It's like the best of all worlds. You're in control of your own destiny, but you're also playing for someone else. So, any questions on this slide, or just some of the schools, or general sort of questions around college squash, high school squash? And then what's probably the most important piece of all of this is, what are the roles of you as parents and us as coaches? I enjoyed writing this slide because I've made a lot of missteps and will continue to make many, and have seen parents do it incredibly well and incredibly poorly. None of us are perfect in any of this, but sort of from what we have witnessed and been a part of. And I say we in terms of the coaching staff here, we all kind of developed this presentation. You know, we have some advice for you. We have some sort of commitments from us, but we ask that you're supportive of your children, positive, that you ask questions, that you empower, that you know your role, and that we have consistent messaging. And that final piece is because most of a player's time is spent with the parents and not the coaches. So to ensure there's consistent messaging between you all and us all is really key. The likelihood is we've all been a part of this, is, for example, avoid the negative car ride home conversations. As your children get older and we get more invested in this process, we're always going to be upfront and honest. We're going to do what we think is best for the athlete. There's more and more academic, books and podcasts coming out. We've included a little link here. I've also included it at the very end on the last page. It's from Arsenal's soccer team, and it's one of their academy players. The image is in the background here, and it's a sort of a preview of, hey, mom and dad, this is what we want you to do, and this is what we don't want you to do, but in a child's mind and a child's voice. And then from our end, both as a club and as a staff, the more tangible things are, we want to be at events with you and with your children. We see it as a sort of huge value to us, because then we can see them compete, see what the other players are doing. It helps set our curriculum when we come back. We meet every Monday to discuss events and the program and clinics and what's the direction that we need to go in next, or are we on path and we need to stay the course. So these events really help us dictate the curriculum and what we're teaching. If they are local events, they are at no cost to the member. So one of the things I was able to do with the club was establish a budget where we could come to the tournaments and support. As your children get older and we're in higher level events, gold and JCT and national championships, any event that becomes an overnight event, there is a small fee. It's $75 per day per person. The club does cover travel and accommodation. So it's sort of an agreement that they had made with us that once they get to that level, we're going to have to sort of help out with that. We do assist with the college recruitment process, sort of in great detail. Everyone that's currently on this call, you're not really concerned about that right now. It really starts in about your sophomore year in high school. And look out for further information around that, but we don't need to be concerned until sophomore year in high school. The sort of purpose for this call is to make sure that we get to that point with sort of the best possible chances if squash in college is something that you want to pursue. And we set goals and create the roadmap and the pathway to achieving those goals, which is, I believe we do much more than that, but as it pertains to US squash structure and tournaments, we want to help players achieve the potential to be as good a squash player as they possibly can be. And we see that events like these are really the carrot. If they don't play in tournaments, you don't get that immediate feedback as to whether or not you're on the right path or you're not. We as coaches and you as parents could be telling them something and they can't see it. The reason that they can't see it is they haven't had that reinforcement. That's kind of outside reinforcement. And I think the tournaments do that. They're a great motivator. They can be discouraging. And that's why we list those characteristics at the top there, because you're going to be a massive, massive support to them, and how you react often determines how they do. And obviously we'll do the best possible job we can do to help support as well. I'm going to continue to add to this list. This is the link to the short video. It's really worthwhile watching. And then when I email this out, I'm going to add some more resources into some of these links. But these are basically the links that I use to help create this presentation. Hopefully you become much more accustomed with the US Squash website, how to navigate it. But it goes without saying, if you're unsure, pick up the phone, shoot us an email. We're here to help. You're not alone in this. It may feel brand new to you. That's understandable, but our job is to help you navigate it. Don't feel like you're being a nuisance. That's truly, that is our job. So we would prefer that you reach out to us. If you have any questions or want to touch on anything else, let me know.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
All good?
Thank you, Rich.
All right, thank you, team. I will share the recording. I'll share the presentation. You can reference back to it. Otherwise, look forward to seeing many of you this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
See you all soon.
Thanks.